Hey, AP Lang teachers, Beth Hall here from Coach Hall Writes. And in today's video, I want to talk about what you need to know about your upcoming AP Lang instructional report. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to stay in touch, so please check out the description box below. There you will find information about my teacher email list. That's the best way to get all my tips sent straight to your inbox. Also, you'll find information about other resources like Facebook groups and things like that. And please don't forget to subscribe. All right, so it's no secret that scores are coming. This is one of the most exciting and sometimes most stressful days of the year for us AP Lang teachers, besides testing day itself. Scores will start to be released on July 5th. Now, I will say in the past, there have been times when multiple people were trying to log on. I remember one year the site kind of crashed temporarily. Students are going to be able to receive their composite score. If they took multiple AP tests, they should be able to see their scores for each of those exams. Their composites are going to be a number 1 through 5. Now, as teachers, we're hoping for them to get those 3s, 4s, or 5s because those tend to indicate qualifying scores. That means that those scores could potentially earn them some college credit. Students will not know how many multiple choice questions they answered correctly. They also will not know what their individual essay scores were. And I've had students ask about this in the past. They really want to know how they got the composite that they did, but unfortunately, the only thing that they get is that number. The other thing to keep in mind too is that students are going to have emotions just like we do as teachers. So it's possible that some students are not going to get the score they had anticipated. Sometimes they score higher than we thought, other times lower. And so it's possible that you might have students reaching out to you seeking clarification, wanting some reassurance. Hopefully, you get a couple celebratory or thank you emails as well. Now, as teachers, we receive a little bit more info. We receive an instructional report. So before we talk about what's on the instructional report, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of know how the AP Lang exam went for the year 2023. Trevor Packer recently tweeted information about the 2023 score breakdown. So I have a screenshot here of one of the tweets, and then I kind of took the info from the other tweets and put it on the slide as well. So let's talk about the overall global breakdown. As you can see from the information he provided, 10% of students scored a 5, 20% scored a 4, and 26% scored a 3. So approximately 56% of students earned a qualifying score of 3 or higher. Now, as teachers, we can have our own opinions about that number, 56%. I know there's temptations to compare 2023 to previous years or to compare AP Lang to AP Lit, but the fact of the matter is 56% of students made a qualifying score of a 3. Now, as I told students over on TikTok, we don't want to hear this information and freak out because remember, it's an average. As far as I know, AP Lang is the largest of the AP tests, meaning that the most students take it. And so sometimes that might influence some of these numbers as well. At the AP reading, Trevor Packer did mention that students did well on the digital exam multiple choice. He said that students really liked the ability to highlight in the passage, and it does seem like the exam is eventually going to be all digital. However, no official plans for that have been announced. So it seems like in the next couple years, students will still have the option to take the paper test if they want to. For each of the FRQs, I think the numbers were as expected. Most students, I believe, start with synthesis because it's the one that they encounter first in their packet. And also, it is the most time consuming, so I think a lot of students like to get it out of the way. So because of that, it's no surprise that 96% of students earned the thesis point. You can see that students did well in row B, which is evidence and commentary, and 9% of students earned the sophistication point. So overall, it seems like students did well with the synthesis question. Next is rhetorical analysis, and these numbers are actually, in my opinion, pretty good as well. 93% of students earned the thesis point. I think the issue here is that some students are still struggling to include the rhetorical choices in their thesis statement, so that could be why the number is 93 and not a little bit higher. I'm sorry that that blue color is a little bit hard to read as well, but it looks like row B was a success for students. Optimistically thinking about next year, hopefully we can get more students from the 2 in row B up to a 3 in row B. And 6% earn the sophistication point. which I think is pretty standard for rhetorical analysis. And then we have the argument essay. This was my student's least favorite essay on the exam, and when I saw the prompt, I understood why. That being said, the numbers seem to be pretty decent. 95% of students earned the thesis point. As long as they asserted a relevant position, they were good there. And again, it looks like students did pretty well in row B, but as with rhetorical analysis, there seems to be quite a large split between the 2 and the 3 in row B. And I think as teachers, we can use this information to influence our instruction next year. It seems like the big difference between a 2 in row B and a 3 in row B is that concrete specific evidence and including enough commentary. As someone who scored question 3 in Tampa this year, I can say that that's one of the big takeaways that I had, is that when I introduce argument to my students, I'm really going to focus on having them really think about the quality of the evidence they are selecting and making sure that they provide enough commentary. And as you can see at the bottom there, it says 5% of students earned the sophistication point. So now that we know what the global numbers look like, let's talk about what we as teachers need to think about before we look at our own scores. Before you look at your scores, I want you to remember the advice that you probably gave your own students on test day. I'm sure many of us told our students a number doesn't define you. You are more than your test score. And we believe that. I know that my students are more than a number. That being said, I also know that when you've invested so much time, it can be really hard to not take it personally if the data doesn't show what you wanted it to show. So remember that you are more than a number. Also, because we are AP Lang teachers, we know the power of words. So please don't say or think that you failed your students. You did the best you could. And because there are multiple factors that contribute to the scores, you didn't fail them. First of all, they were the ones taking the test. And it is a hard test. But also, I can promise you that some of the most important gains that our students have had, some of the biggest lessons that they have learned, have not really been about the AP Lang exam. The students who enter your classroom have learned to be better thinkers, better writers, better speakers. They've learned to articulate their thoughts on some important real-world issues. They've learned how to be better citizens. And so because of all that, you didn't fail them. Remember that the process of becoming a stronger writer takes time. And your students in May grew so much from August. So celebrate those victories. It's also important to remember that we have different students, and a lot of times it can be really tempting to compare numbers on social media. Sometimes there are teacher Facebook groups where people post their scores, and it can be really tempting to compare your data to their data. But here's the thing, each class is different. So you could have 2 teachers in the same school with 2 very different classes, and their numbers might look different. You could have 2 teachers in the same state who have different numbers, because guess what? They have different students. And so I'm sure you can understand why it could be detrimental to compare your scores to somebody else who's in an entirely different state, some stranger on the internet. It's also important to remember that scores vary from year to year. So while we love to see growth in those upward trends, these students were not the same students that you had last year. And so if you see a change in scores, just remember that it's a different group of students. So now let's talk about the instructional planning report. You will get information about how your school or how your group did, and you can also compare it to the state, national, and global scores. So you will know each student's composite score, but you won't necessarily know how each student did individually. So just like I was saying before, how students don't get to know what their MCQ score was and what each of their FRQs were, we don't really get that information either. We kind of get a holistic look at the cohort. So you will know how your group did in comparison to the state and global scores. If I remember correctly, last year there were these little boxes on the side that said like, exceeds global average or something like that. And they break it down by skill. So for both multiple choice and the FRQs, you can see how your students did on very specific elements. And that's great because it will help highlight our strengths and it can give us insight into where to focus our attention next year. So remember, we're going to give ourselves grace. We're going to celebrate the wins, as small or as big as they may seem. And we're going to breathe. We're going to enjoy our summers because teachers, we've earned it. Before we close this video, I want to invite you to check out the description box below. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned my teacher email list. You'll also find information about the English Coaching Garden, which is a Facebook group that I run with Tim Freitas from the Garden of English. We also host teacher chat during the year. Right now, it is on Light Hall, and it's the last Sunday of each month. We've got some exciting things planned for the upcoming school year for teacher chat, so we hope that you'll join us for that as well. Thank you so much for watching and for your continued support of Coach Hall Writes. Please remember that no matter what your school reports say, you are an absolute rock star. Until next time, happy teaching!